Let me dwell a little bit more on the on another line of action, really, also study and action, which is in the line of ethnomathematics again. What you have on the one hand is a series of descriptions, some old, like in Joseph Needham's work, or Granet, that's already 2-3 generations ago, and some very new, very recent, where people study, do research really on actual practices that have somehow formal thinking, or what we would call mathematical thinking then in it, embedded in it, implicit in it, or sometimes explicitly, like counting, etc., counting systems. Now you can expand that. And you can expand that in actual, very concrete, even basic level, primary level education, which is some of the engagements that I have been busy with over the years, and most certainly recently. One is in the book here, Multimathemacy, which is a term coined on the basis of multiliteracy. Okay, I claim that there is something like multimathemacy, which is an interaction, of course, of anthropology, anthropological studies, and mathematics education. If you think, as I do, that competence, proficiency, if you like, in mathematical reasoning is more and more a necessity in the globalized world that we live in, this does not entail, this does not mean that you hence have to learn, let's say, French-style mathematics courses. That's not necessarily so. But you have the formal thinking that is there in your own culture. You have to detect it first. People all over the world use thinking, of course. They don't start thinking when we come around, we Westerners. They already did. They develop, for example, and this is part of the material that I refer to, describe here, they build things to begin with. And building is not just trial and error all the time. There is a system in there. There are traditions in there. You have forms that are developed and that keep coming back and that become typical in a certain sense for this community and not for the next one, etc. You have rituals all over the place, all over the world. You have very different rituals, and rituals are maybe they are enactments, and anyhow they use formal thinking. People don't just do anything when they have a ritual. It's very formalized, literally. So, again, you could say, in between brackets, that people are using their mathematical skills, their mathematical knowledge, which is most of the time not very explicit, in this formalization of ritualistic life. And you can go on, you have dance, you have music, etc. This is not unique to the West, of course, all of this. Music is very close to, and even explicit, because we have music chords, of course, it's very close to mathematics, and it's not strange that good mathematicians or formal thinkers, think of Einstein, the best known example, are also playing music or feel a kinship with music. It's not so strange, I think. But well, okay. But recognizing that these things, this formal thinking and what we call mostly an implicit form of mathematical thinking is in there, the world round, but we don't recognize it, we don't spot it as such. That's the claim. That's a very, very, very good basis to start and develop and redirect, in fact, education in mathematics, which then means that you learn to count in a more systematic way. You learn to orient yourself spatially in a more explicit way than you did before in your own cultural setting. So you work on, you feed on the informal, I should say, mathematical knowledge that is there in your culture and sophisticate it through education. But the main intuition was there already. The main knowledge was there already, mostly implicitly, and you work on that understanding as well, you know, that insight in order to develop it more, to make it more explicit, etc. Now, I think that's, in terms of education, it would be a very interesting road to mathematics teaching, rather than have some branch of developed mathematics, explicit mathematics from here, and just supplant it somewhere else, and then have the result of it in a lot of times being a dropout. Okay. Now, along these lines, we're doing different things. We're having different initiatives in this group of, and in some areas of the world, important group. I mean, it's not exotic. It's a real alternative of ethnomathematicians, where you have a combined effort of mathematicians and anthropologists, recognizing these different origins and trying to develop education on the basis of these different understandings, home understandings, if you like. For example, now we're with a French colleague, Rik van den Driessen. We are putting together a volume in the same series of Springer, Indigenous Knowledge and Ethnomathematics, where you have several contributions, half of them by mathematicians, half of them by anthropologists who worked and work in different areas of the world, for example, on games. People all around the world have games, and they use these games well, in their free time, for one thing, but also as a sort of a means for socialization. Children become part of, become a personality within the community, also through games. Think of your own youth. That's a way of socializing, of course. Learning a game is dealing with others by playing the same game, etc. Now, several of these games, and several of the games that are discussed, it's not only games, but most of the contributions are about this, are very intricate, complex systems of formal reasoning. People count, for example. People predict, try out a line of thinking in order to defeat the other one, etc., which includes really decision-making steps and calculating in the broad sense of the term. That's another example that can immediately be used in education, in school education. Start from what the children know already from home, really from home, these games, and starting from there, develop more sophisticated, more explicit mathematical reasoning. But it's in there already. Another example, a famous one, I think, is from design, if you like. We all know the catamaran, this boat, this little boat, where you have these double barriers, I think it's called in English. Instead of one boat, you have in fact two little boats, okay, which allow for a sort of equilibrium when you go with these little constructions. These little boats go and for days go on the ocean, really, in the Pacific area. The catamaran as a concept and as a type of boat was developed there ages ago, probably 1,000 years or longer ago. People, fishers, fishing men, in that area, on these small islands, went from island to island over hundreds of kilometers, had to orient themselves, so they developed a sort of reed compass, if you like, or chart, that where you have different stars, you have the moon, etc. It's all depicted on a chart that you take with you on the boat, and you orient yourself with this, plus with the currents in the ocean that you know about, because those who went before you were talking about this, the warmth or the coldness of the sea at certain points, etc. And you orient yourself this way, and you happen to reach the other island first and foremost, and most of the time also to come back and load it with fish. And that was done by means also of this catamaran. Now, if you look at this, these little boats, they are cut from palm trees. You use two palm trees, and one is a stabilizer of the other one, and from that you can sit in one, and from there on, with the stabilizers, you can go ahead and for hundreds of kilometers. Safer than this one type of boat, a unique boat that we have been using all the time. Now, people use this. They use the way to orient themselves with this sort of compass. We have some studies on this from 30, 40 years ago already. We have some attempts by NATO circles to use this knowledge. As far as I know, they didn't continue, but at least they used it. And we have a bright Englishman, at least he thought it was bright, who saw this in 1890, something around there. This indigenous knowledge, this design where you use mathematics in order to make these boats, these catamarans, and he thought, this is a genial idea, I'm going to steal it, as we did as colonial people, and bring it out in Britain. It was a disaster. Nobody was interested in that sort of boat. It's not a boat, right? It's two boats, and it's for children or something. No, they left it. Now it's a big hit. The catamaran is like, you know, then you're really established if you own a catamaran. It's special, it's luxury, it's, I don't know. But it's stolen from these people. Meanwhile, they have been, with the Second World War, these people have been on the islands over there in the Pacific, have been come in contact with the Americans during the Second World War, the Japanese front, and they were, of course, dissuaded to continue to use their boats, so they dropped it, most of them, and they were using now motorboats. The Americans said, this is the future, right? This is progress. So they get motorboats, they get them, buy them, I don't know what, there's a business in that, of course. But of course, you have to import everything. The motor to begin with, and the petrol, the oil. And now, with the crisis in fossil material, the oil is getting more and more expensive. On these islands, there are several islands that are getting isolated because, you know, you buy your oil, you use it, and yeah, you have to buy it again and use again. But then you have to have enough fishing and enough fish to sell in order to keep going. And at some point, 10, 15 years ago, several of these people went bankrupt, finished. Now, some of the bright people, I would say, on the islands said, and some of the work by anthropologists is done on these. A colleague called Rubinstein is working on it, for example, said, well, let's go back to our tradition. We used to be able to survive there with our boats, with our original catamarans. We know how to make them. We have all the material here. We're not dependent on the oil that we should buy from others and then go bankrupt because we can't buy it, we can't earn our living, etc. That's the wrong track. So let's start again with the catamaran. But meanwhile, we learned a couple of things, and we know how we can cut a palm tree so that it becomes a boat, right? But we know we can cut it in an easier way, using the solar energy now to drive our machinery, okay? Using a GPS to go on the ocean, which is safer, and that's again one GPS you have to buy, and that's it, okay? There ends your cost. And you're independent, you stay independent, but you sort of link up again with tradition, if you like, with what you left behind because of so-called modernity or progress. You're picking it up again, you're using some elements that you learned meanwhile, and you're independent again. Now that's a very intriguing, and in order to do that, you educate your pupils, your children, to have knowledge of both sides. And again, you can now systematically reason about, more explicitly, more mathematically sophisticated, if you like, a sophisticated way. You can reason about what you're doing and how you're planning, how you're organizing your boat, what size of boat would be successful, etc. You can measure it. You didn't do that before. You can do it. You did it more qualitatively. You can do it a bit more quantifyingly now, but in the same spirit, in the same intuition, etc. Now that's a very intriguing sort of development, which has more future than do away with tradition and have motorboats for everybody and then find out that you can't buy the oil anymore, and, you know, this sort of thing. So there's a lot of things like this, there's a lot of initiatives like this that are really open for everybody to go into and develop and turn into educational programs. And I think it's happening. It doesn't simmer away, because the first instance people say, yeah, that's all very interesting and exotic, and yeah, but it's museum stuff. Now they say, no, maybe that's survival stuff. And several of these things, small-sized, local, common-like, are in development, and I think that's a very good a line of thinking. Of course, when, you know, a mega commercial structure come around, they will dissuade you or try to dissuade you. Don't listen to them. Just be independent and, you know, and see what you can use, and maybe they can use things from you also. And but don't say, you know, all this is backwards. And no, because then you're colonized. And there's another way. There's a third way there. And this sort of mathematics teaching can help, which is good news, I think. But it's hard. It's not everybody's interested. For example, typically the French rationalistic educational system refuses, says that mathematics is mathematics. And we mathematicians, we know what it's all about. Yes, but then the dropout, yeah, that's because they're not able to, you know, to get this sort of knowledge. No, that's colonizing, but well. That's a funny thing that you get this combination between, on the one hand, anthropologists, so studying exotic, far away, dying out groups, and on the other hand, but maybe this is the future. So you can have a sort of fertilizing effect of one on the other. That's